10 Stoic habits that will change your life forever. Discipline and mental strength. 2,000 years ago, a small group of philosophers in Greece and Rome arrived at a set of conclusions about the human mind that modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm with research and data. They did not have laboratories. They did not have brain scans. What they had was relentless observation of their own thoughts, decades of disciplined self-examination, and the courage to test their ideas against real suffering, exile, war, illness, betrayal, and loss. What emerged from that work was not a comforting philosophy. It was something far more valuable. It was a practical operating manual for the human mind, built from habits that anyone, in any era, could pick up and use. Today, you are going to learn 10 of those habits, the ones that built emperors, slaves turned philosophers, and statesmen who remained unshaken while everything around them fell apart. These are not abstract ideas. They are tools you can begin using before this video ends. If you want more of this kind of wisdom delivered to you consistently, subscribe to this channel right now, because what follows could quietly reshape the way you move through every difficult moment for the rest of your life. Let's begin. Habit 1. They begin the day with intention. The Stoics rarely allowed their mornings to begin passively. Marcus Aurelius started many of his days by mentally rehearsing the difficulties he might face. Rude people, frustrating delays, unexpected setbacks. Not to feel pessimistic, but to remove the element of surprise that so often hijacks an unprepared mind. This habit of beginning the day with deliberate intention, rather than reactive autopilot, is one of the clearest markers separating disciplined minds from scattered ones. A day started without direction tends to be governed entirely by whatever demands arrive first, leaving the person feeling controlled by their circumstances rather than directing them. Setting intention does not require an elaborate ritual. It requires a few honest minutes before the noise of the day begins, asking what kind of person you want to be in the hours ahead, and what specific challenge today is likely to test that intention against. Someone who decides in the morning that they will remain patient is far less likely to be derailed by an afternoon conflict than someone who never considered the possibility at all. The mind, much like a ship, sails more steadily when someone has already charted a course before the wind picks up. Begin tomorrow morning with 5 minutes of quiet reflection before reaching for your phone. Ask yourself plainly what virtue you most want to practice today: patience, discipline, honesty, courage, and identify one situation likely to test it. This single habit, repeated daily, slowly transforms your relationship with each day from reactive drifting into deliberate navigation, and that shift alone produces a sense of mental strength most people spend years searching for without ever finding. Habit 2. They distinguish between what they control and what they don't. At the very center of Stoic philosophy sits a single, deceptively simple distinction. Some things are within your power, and everything else is not. Epictetus taught that your judgments, your effort, your choices, and your reactions belong entirely to you, while other people's opinions, the outcomes of events, and the past belong to forces outside your control completely. Confusing these two categories is, according to the Stoics, the single greatest source of unnecessary human suffering, because energy spent trying to control the uncontrollable is energy that produces only frustration and exhaustion. This habit requires constant practice, because the mind naturally drifts toward worrying about things it cannot change. Sharp Stoic practitioners train themselves to ask, almost reflexively, whether a given worry belongs in the category of their own effort or in the category of forces beyond their reach. A delayed flight, a critical comment, a decision made by someone else, none of these belong to you, and continuing to grip them tightly only burns energy you could be spending elsewhere, on the parts of life that are actually yours to shape. Practice this today by noticing the next time you feel frustration rising. Pause and ask directly, is this within my control? If the answer is no, consciously release your grip on it, the way you would set down something too heavy to carry any further. If the answer is yes, direct your full energy there instead. This simple sorting habit, repeated consistently, is often the very first shift Stoic practitioners report when they say their mental strength began to noticeably improve. Habit 3. They practice voluntary discomfort. One of the more counterintuitive habits the Stoics practiced was deliberately choosing discomfort, even when comfort was easily available. Seneca occasionally ate the simplest food, wore plain clothing, and slept without luxury, not because he lacked the means for comfort, but because he wanted to remain unafraid of losing it. This habit trains a kind of psychological insurance. By voluntarily experiencing small discomforts, the mind becomes far less terrified of involuntary ones, because it has already proven to itself that discomfort is survivable, even manageable. Modern life is engineered almost entirely around eliminating discomfort as quickly as possible, which has quietly made many people more fragile rather than more resilient. A missed meal feels catastrophic. A cold shower feels unbearable. A single uncomfortable conversation gets avoided indefinitely. The Stoics understood that this constant avoidance does not protect mental strength, it erodes it, because a mind that has never practiced discomfort has no evidence that it can handle real adversity when it eventually, inevitably arrives. Begin small. Take a cold shower once this week. Skip a meal occasionally and notice that hunger, while uncomfortable, is not an emergency. Have the difficult conversation you have been postponing instead of avoiding it further. Each of these small, voluntary discomforts builds a kind of quiet confidence that compounds over time, until eventually you notice that circumstances which once felt threatening barely register as inconvenient. This is not about suffering for its own sake. It is about proving to yourself, repeatedly, that you are stronger than your comfort has been letting you believe. Habit 4. They reflect honestly each night. The Stoics treated the end of each day as seriously as the beginning, often reviewing their actions, decisions, and reactions before sleep. Seneca described asking himself nightly what bad habit he had cured, what fault he had resisted, and where he had genuinely improved, approaching the review with honesty rather than harsh self-punishment. This nightly habit closes the loop on learning, because without reflection, mistakes simply repeat indefinitely, never examined closely enough to actually change. This kind of reflection requires a specific kind of honesty that many people avoid instinctively, because it is uncomfortable to admit where we fell short. But the Stoics understood that self-deception, however comforting in the moment, prevents the very growth a person claims to want. A nightly review does not need to be harsh or self-critical to the point of cruelty. It simply needs to be accurate, the way a good coach reviews game footage, not to humiliate the player, but to identify exactly what needs adjustment before the next game begins. Tonight, before sleep, spend 5 honest minutes asking 3 questions. Where did I act with discipline today? Where did I let emotion or impulse take the wheel instead of reason? What is one specific thing I will do differently tomorrow? This nightly ritual, repeated consistently, slowly builds a kind of self-awareness that most people never develop, because most people never pause long enough to actually look. If these first 4 habits are resonating, take a moment to subscribe to this channel now, because the next 6 go even deeper into the daily architecture of Stoic mental strength. Habit 5. They treat obstacles as training, not punishment. Where most people experience an obstacle as evidence that life is unfair, the Stoics trained themselves to experience it as material to work with. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle itself becomes the way forward, transforming whatever blocks the path into fuel for the path itself. This reframing does not eliminate difficulty, but it changes the relationship a person has with it entirely, from victim of circumstance to active participant shaping the outcome. This habit becomes especially powerful during genuinely hard seasons of life. A job loss can either be experienced purely as punishment, or it can be treated as an unplanned opportunity to reassess a direction that may have needed reassessing anyway. A health scare can either be experienced purely as misfortune, or it can become the wake-up call that finally produces lasting lifestyle change. The event itself does not change based on this reframing, but the person's capacity to respond productively to it changes enormously, and that difference is often what separates people who are broken by hardship from people who are strengthened by it. Practice this the next time something frustrating happens, even something small. Instead of immediately asking why this is happening to you, ask what this obstacle is making possible that would not have been possible otherwise. This question will not always produce an immediate or satisfying answer, but the simple act of asking it begins shifting your mind away from helplessness and toward agency, which is precisely the posture the Stoics considered essential to lasting mental strength. Habit 6. They speak less and listen more. The Stoics held a particular respect for restraint in speech, viewing excessive talking as a sign of an undisciplined mind eager to fill silence rather than actually understand what is being said. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, reportedly remarked that nature gave humans 2 ears and 1 mouth so that they might listen twice as much as they speak. This habit of restrained speech is not about being passive or withholding opinions out of fear. It is about recognizing that most conversations improve dramatically when one party actually listens before responding, rather than simply waiting for their turn to talk. This habit also builds a kind of quiet authority. People who speak less but more deliberately tend to be taken more seriously than those who fill every silence with commentary, because their words carry the weight of consideration rather than impulse. Listening more also provides an enormous practical advantage. It produces actual information, while talking mostly reveals what you already believe. A disciplined mind understands that gathering information is almost always more valuable than broadcasting opinion, especially in situations where the stakes are genuinely high. Practice this in your next conversation by deliberately waiting until the other person has fully finished speaking before formulating your response, rather than composing your reply while they are still talking. Notice how much more you actually absorb when your mind is not simultaneously occupied with what you plan to say next. This small shift, repeated consistently, builds both stronger relationships and a sharper, more disciplined mind, because true listening is itself a form of mental restraint that very few people ever genuinely practice. Habit 7. They separate their self-worth from outside opinion. A defining habit of Stoic mental strength is the deliberate refusal to let external opinion dictate internal peace. Epictetus taught that other people's judgments of you are entirely outside your control, and tying your sense of worth to something you cannot control guarantees instability, because that opinion can shift at any moment for reasons that have nothing to do with you. This does not mean ignoring useful feedback. It means refusing to outsource your fundamental sense of value to an audience whose approval was never reliable to begin with. This habit is particularly difficult in a world built around visible metrics of approval, likes, comments, follower counts, public praise or criticism. The Stoic mind learns to engage with this world without becoming dependent on it, treating external validation as a pleasant but unnecessary bonus rather than an emotional requirement. A person whose self-worth depends entirely on outside approval will always be at the mercy of forces beyond their control. A person who has separated the two can absorb criticism, ignore unfair judgment, and continue moving forward with a stability that genuinely surprises people who have never built this same internal foundation. Begin practicing this by noticing the next time someone's opinion of you causes disproportionate emotional disturbance. Ask yourself honestly whether this opinion is actually accurate and useful, or simply uncomfortable because it conflicts with how you want to be seen. If it is useful, extract the lesson and let the rest go. If it is simply someone else's projection, release it entirely, the way you would release smoke that was never something you could hold onto in the first place. Habit 8. They practice gratitude through negative visualization. One of the more unusual Stoic habits involves briefly imagining the loss of things currently taken for granted: health, relationships, comfort, even life itself. This practice, known as negative visualization, was never meant to produce anxiety. It was meant to dissolve the numbness that familiarity creates, restoring genuine appreciation for things that have quietly become invisible simply because they are always present. Seneca and Marcus Aurelius both practiced this regularly, briefly imagining hardship not to invite suffering, but to sharpen gratitude for the life currently in front of them. This habit works because the human mind adapts rapidly to whatever becomes normal, a tendency psychologists now call hedonic adaptation. A home that once felt like a dream becomes ordinary within months. A relationship that once felt miraculous can fade into routine. Negative visualization interrupts this adaptation deliberately, briefly reminding the mind what life would feel like without what it currently has, and in doing so, restores a sense of appreciation that comfort alone tends to quietly erase over time. Try this practice once this week. Spend 2 or 3 minutes imagining the genuine absence of something you currently have: your health, a person you love, your home, your ability to see or hear. Sit with that imagined absence briefly, then return your attention to the fact that, right now, you still have it. This brief exercise, uncomfortable as it may feel initially, tends to produce an immediate and noticeable shift in appreciation for circumstances that had quietly become background noise in your daily awareness. Habit 9. They respond deliberately instead of reacting instantly. The Stoics placed enormous value on the space between stimulus and response, understanding that this space is where genuine freedom lies. An untrained mind reacts instantly and automatically, often regretting the reaction moments later. A trained mind creates a deliberate pause, however brief, in which judgment rather than impulse determines what happens next. Epictetus taught that disturbance comes not from events themselves but from our immediate judgments about them, and that pause is exactly where those judgments can be examined before they are allowed to drive behavior. Building this pause requires consistent practice, because the instinct to react instantly is deeply wired and difficult to override casually. The Stoics practiced this through constant self-monitoring, catching themselves in the early stages of anger, frustration, or anxiety, and deliberately inserting a moment of reflection before acting. Over time, this pause becomes nearly automatic, and the people who have built it tend to be remarkably difficult to provoke, because provocation requires an instant reaction that they have spent years training themselves not to give. Practice this the next time something triggers a strong emotional response. Before speaking or acting, take a single slow breath and ask yourself what response would actually serve the outcome you want, rather than what response would simply discharge the tension you feel in the moment. This small pause, repeated consistently across enough triggering moments, eventually becomes instinctive, and that instinct is one of the clearest, most reliable signs of genuine Stoic mental strength. Habit 10. They accept what cannot be changed. The final habit, and in many ways the foundation beneath all the others, is genuine acceptance of what cannot be changed. The Stoics did not consider acceptance to be passive resignation. They considered it an active, disciplined choice to stop wasting energy fighting reality and instead redirect that energy toward whatever response remains genuinely possible. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about loving whatever happens to him, not because everything that happened was good, but because resisting an unchangeable reality only adds unnecessary suffering on top of difficulty that already exists. This habit becomes most important during life's hardest moments: illness, loss, failure, circumstances entirely outside anyone's control. The instinct in these moments is often to demand that reality be different than it is, to bargain, to resist, to ask endlessly why this happened. The Stoic habit of acceptance does not eliminate grief or difficulty, but it removes the additional layer of suffering that comes from refusing to acknowledge what has already occurred, freeing up energy to focus on what can still be influenced moving forward. Practice this the next time you face something you cannot undo. Allow yourself to feel the full weight of it honestly, without minimizing or suppressing the difficulty. Then ask directly, given that this has already happened, what is the most constructive next action available to me? This question does not erase pain, but it redirects energy away from a battle that cannot be won and toward a path that can still be walked, which is precisely the kind of mental strength the Stoics spent their entire philosophy trying to cultivate. Bringing the 10 habits together. What you have just learned are not abstract philosophical concepts reserved for ancient emperors and exiled philosophers. They are practical, repeatable habits available to anyone willing to practice them consistently, starting today. Beginning the day with intention. Distinguishing what you control from what you don't. Practicing voluntary discomfort. Reflecting honestly each night. Treating obstacles as training. Speaking less and listening more. Separating self-worth from outside opinion. Practicing gratitude through negative visualization. Responding deliberately instead of reacting instantly. Accepting what cannot be changed. None of these require talent, money, or perfect circumstances. They require only repetition, and repetition is something entirely within your control. If even one of these 10 habits struck something in you, that is exactly the kind of shift real transformation begins with. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next set of lessons drawn from the most disciplined minds in human history. This is a community built for people who are tired of drifting reactively through life and ready to build the kind of quiet, unshakable strength the Stoics spent their lives cultivating. Thank you for spending this time with these ideas. Choose one habit from this list, begin practicing it today, and let it become the first thread in a life built on genuine discipline and lasting mental strength.